Chapter 31. Black Betty. Francois and Isaiah led their party into the canal's tunnel along the raised pathway that ran beside the water. The flickering kerosene illuminated a slow-moving span of green that stretched some 5 yards across to a corresponding path on the far side. Despite a 15-foot-high peak, the arch of it made the space feel claustrophobic. They could sense the mountain of granite above, its weight pressing down on them more and more as they continued down the mule path. 50 paces in, the lamps lit up a recently erected concrete wall. It sealed off the tunnel from water to ceiling. There was a small rectangular cutout in the center. A machine Gewehr .8 barrel was just protruding from it, aimed directly at the pathway. Single, square myrtle holes for spotters and riflemen were cut from the concrete on either side of the MG. At the top, dead center, a round ventilation duct ran out into the tunnel. A large steel door hung before them at the end of the walkway. There was no indication that anyone sat behind the machine gun, but having it dialed in right on them was disconcerting. Francois turned to the group and spoke quietly. His deep voice rumbled off the concrete and stone. "What shall we do?" "Shit, Deputy, I see a door. Knock on the motherfucker," said Isaiah. "If anybody's home, tell them they ought to open on up." Francois struck the door with the bottom of his fist several times. The pounding echoed. Then there was silence. "Hello," he said. Nothing. Francois tried the handle. It turned easily, and he pulled it open. The heavy steel moved silently on well-oiled hinges, swinging wide to reveal the pitch black beyond. Francois and Finbar led the way with their lanterns. Isaiah and Caitlin brought Renoir through. The Mastiff and James followed. Durant was last. He shut the door behind them. The clanging thud of it, joining the steel frame, vibrated through the cavern and faded away. The tunnel before them stretched on, again dissolving into claustrophobic dark beyond the cast of the kerosene's fire. Isaiah walked onto a raised concrete platform that had been built up into a machine gun nest. It was brand new and pristine. The black steel of the machine Gewehr .8 threatening the approach looked like it had never even been fired. A long, fresh canvas ribbon of brass cartridges ran up into it. Its cooling can was brimming with water. Beside it, there were stacks of belted rounds lying ready in ammo cans, enough to hold off a brigade. A full rack of Mauser rifles hung on the wall. Beneath it were boxes of loaded magazines. Francois held his lantern overhead and looked out into the cavern. A spiderweb of wires and steel cables ran overhead. Off the central wiring, a cable ran down to what looked like a miniature train engine car on the mule path. "What's that?" asked Durant. "Electrical mule for pulling barges through the canal," Francois said. His lamp's flame caught sight of wires that ran along the wall beside the train tracks. The glass spheres of unlit incandescent bulbs reflected the kerosene's light back to them. "There is electricity here." His eyes followed the string of wire to a switch box on the wall. He walked to it and opened the metal panel, revealing a large lever. The switch was in the off position. Francois lifted the switch, then slammed it back to on, clicking it securely into place. Nothing. The line was cold dead. Wire, but no power. We must find the generator, said Francois. Isaiah and Caitlin helped Renoir to a seat next to the machine gun. The Mastiff sat beside him. Isaiah straightened back up and looked out from the defensive position into the dark tunnel. What y'all think that Bosch, who ought to be manning this position, wandered on off to? Even spoken quietly, the question resounded like distant thunder in the tunnel. James swallowed hard at the thoughts it gave rise to. Oh boy. I guess we'd better find out, said Durant. He turned to Finn. Sergeant, you want to come with me? We'll have a look around. No, man. I didn't think so, said Finn. And then call me Sergeant. I'm not in the British Army anymore. I'll stay here and keep an eye on the door. You go and meander about through the dark. Give us a shout if you run into anything. If you heard a machine gun, you'll know that I have. Isaiah laughed. Well, at least we know we ain't going to hear any bullshit out of you. He turned to Durant. I'll go with you. Francois. Francois nodded. Oui. Caitlin stood. Here. She unslung the shotgun and offered it to Isaiah. He hesitated. She nodded toward the MG and the row of Mausers. We got plenty of guns here. Isaiah smiled wry and accepted the shotgun. Just on loan, then? Caitlin smiled. Aye, just on loan. Francois drew his cutlass and led Isaiah and Durant into the darkened tunnel. The Mastiff leapt up with a bark and jogged after them. Caitlin wanted to call out for the dog to come back, but she remembered that she did not know its name and was not, in fact, its owner. She watched her head off with the men, surrounded by the flickering sphere of kerosene flame, not realizing how attached she'd become to the comfort of the Mastiff's presence until the beast was gone. Finn sat down behind the MG and looked out toward the tunnel mouth. The grey of late afternoon could be seen where the tunnel opened back out to the world. He ran the sweep of the gun back and forth and tested the trigger pull. He grinned at Caitlin. Now, if we'd had some of these last Easter, it would have been a different story for those British cunts, certain. Caitlin did not respond. She sat down and patted Renoir's knee. How are you feeling? Truly? Renoir swallowed. His smile was ironic. Never better. James took out Harlan's pocket watch. He rubbed the case on his sleeve, bringing out the shine. Then he opened it and turned it until it caught enough lamplight to reveal the face. Just past 4. Sunset was still some 3 hours away, but in the tunnel's dark, night seemed to have already choked them down into its belly. They watched Francois's lantern bobble away into the depths of the tunnel. After 10 minutes, it disappeared around a distant bend, and the tunnel swallowed its glow. There was only blackness in its wake. Francois led Isaiah, the Mastiff, and Durant along the rail tracks through the darkness. Behind them, Finn's lantern faded away as they rounded the bend. The boots scuffing the concrete walkway and the rhythmic breath of the big dog were the only sounds. It became just the 4 of them, venturing into the dark, surrounded by the small ring the lantern cast out onto the mossy stone walls. After a few more long minutes, they got to the first gated canal lock. Resting in the lock, They found the first in a train of Peniche River barges. The barges stretched 50 yards long and 5 across, nearly the entire width of the canal. The one moored in the lock sat low in the water, caught between the top and bottom gates. It was lashed securely to a metal mooring above the sluice. Francois stepped down onto the open deck, and the others followed. The barge had been a hauler of coal in its heyday, but the Germans reclaimed it for their own purposes. There were 40 cots laid out on the deck, with plenty of spare room to accommodate barracks bags and kit for the 40 junior officers who had called it home. They traversed the barge, cautious. The mastiff stalked the rows of bunks, sniffing at it all. The German rucksacks were there, along with a scattering of spare ammunition and personal effects, almost everything the company would need to wage war. But the owners of all the kit and rifles were nowhere to be found. Isaiah dug through a few bags and procured 2 sapper flashlights. He turned on his and passed the other to Durant. "What do you think?" asked Durant quietly. "I think we keep on looking," said Isaiah. "I'm happy this is 40 empty cots instead of 40 empty bodies. But I'm wondering where them bodies is off to, you know?" "Oui," Francois nodded. "Let us continue. Perhaps we find the generator as well." Just past the upper gate, floating high, they found more barges. A total of 10 were chained together. The first one mirrored the barge trapped in the lock. 40 cots, 40 kits, no occupants or owners. The next 4 had top and bottom bunks instead of single cots. The deck was packed with rows of bunks, 3 across the deck and 15 front to back. "Those first 2 must be for lieutenants and NCOs," said Durant. "God damn! They're going to have a brigade down here if this tunnel stretches back far enough." Isaiah spat into the canal. Durant nodded. "Question being, where the fuck are they? 5,000-6,000 men? Half of that many bodies that just vanished up into thin air," said Isaiah. The 5th barge was a floating field kitchen, stocked with canned goods, rations, and cots for the cooks and undercooks. Of the cooks and their helpers themselves, no sign. The next in the chain was a full field hospital, followed by 4 more barges of the 90-man bunk, bed, and kit variety. They paused after they finished inspecting the last barge in the train. "Should we just bring the others up here?" asked Isaiah. "Maybe," Durant replied. "Doesn't seem any safer here than it does back there. That way, though. Bodies or no bodies. At least we got a way out back at the entrance." "Perhaps," said Francois, "we should take food, beds, medical supply, kit, and float them down to the tunnel entrance on the first barge. It will give us a place to sleep near the sortie." "You know how to run a barge, deputy?" asked Isaiah. "Oui." Francois' mind went far away. "And no canals. We must fill the lock from the upper gate sluice. Once the level is as high as the water below the lower gate, we open the lock, voila, the barge will flow through. With electricity, it will be easy to pull the barge down to the entrance with the tractor. Even if we cannot find the power generator, with help from the others, we can be the mule ourselves and move the peniche downstream." Isaiah shined his newfound flashlight into the canalway beyond them. The canal curved away into the blackness. "How far do you think this tunnel runs?" Isaiah asked. Renoir said 6 kilometers. Durant replied. Isaiah sighed. Shit, that's a good round trip. I'm gonna head that way and take a gander for that generator. I don't aim to be the mule power for that barge if I don't have to. He pointed the flashlight at the string of bulbs above them. Might be nice to shine a little light on the subject, too, while I'm at it. How's your ankle? Asked Durant. Isaiah looked down at the wrap coming out of his left boot. It feels better to keep it moving than to let it lock. The wound ain't open up, as far as I can see. Durant nodded. Okay. I'll go get James and the Irishman to help gather gear and join the mule team if we can get the generator on. If we can't get the generator on. Isaiah held up his flashlight. Hey, deputy, swap me out for that lantern. Battery goes south on this thing. I don't aim to get stuck out there in the dark. Francois nodded. He passed the kerosene lantern to Isaiah and took the flashlight in return. All right, y'all stay safe. See you soon. Isaiah hopped gingerly down off the barge onto the walkway. The mastiff barked, then jumped down after, heeling beside him. Isaiah glanced down. Looks like I got myself some company. Come on, pup. He clicked his tongue, and she heeled, continuing beside him on the path. Durant and Francois emptied 2 rucksacks and filled them to overflowing with medical supplies. They shouldered the packs and headed back. When they got to the lock, where the foremost barge sat, Francois took both full rucksacks and jumped down onto its deck. I'll be back, said Durant. See if you can figure out the locks. Francois nodded. Oui, very simple. Durant continued on. He picked his pace up to a jog. He covered the journey to the machine gun nest in 10 minutes.